Welcome to Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of British Columbia. Brought to you by our title sponsor, Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. Come along with us as we take conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. We have partnered with Mountain Tough Fitness Lab to help get you in shape and mentally stronger. Whether you're a veteran hunter or just starting out, the Mountain Tough app will take you to the next level. We personally train using the Mountain Tough programs, and we believe in it so much that we want to give you 6 weeks for free using code SHEEPBC. That's SHEEPBC. Check out Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. You won't be disappointed. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Stone Glacier. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Stone Glacier, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems.
Well, good morning, John. Great to see your smiling face and great to connect with you on the podcast here. I think you're coming live from Colorado, so welcome to the podcast.
Yep, live from Colorado on a Friday morning in Denver, and pretty exciting night last night. We had the Northern Lights here, so something people in BC are probably familiar with, but we don't get them very often. Had a full show of Northern Lights last night, so pretty exciting being in Colorado. So.
Are you right in the city there? Like, could you see it with the town lights and everything? Or
I'm west of town. I'm up in the foothills, so I'm up in the mountains, and it'll probably blow some of your listeners' minds. But I'm at almost 3,000 meters in elevation at my house, so almost 10,000 feet U.S. So it's up there. So no, I've got a pretty good view of the mountains and the city, but I could see them right off my deck. So pretty crazy.
Very cool. That's why you're in such bloody good shape. You're breathing that thin air all the time when you come down to sea level. You're just running around, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, heart rate's down to like in the 40s sometimes if you're at sea level. You're like, it's too much oxygen here. Yeah.
How's your fall been going? I know we've been trying to line this podcast up, and you got some hunts lined up and stuff. So what's that look like for you?
Yeah, so busy fall for me. It's always busy. I always tell people I'll talk to you in November. I usually take as much as September and October as I can off here. That's our busy hunting seasons. I went on a sheep hunt with a good friend of mine whose dad had drawn. We're not as lucky as the folks in BC. We can't go over the counter every year. And he had, I want to say 23 years of applying in, and he drew a tag at 77 years old. And I mean, he was great. Everything was good. I think our ability, the couple of guys that went with us, our ability to spot and find sheep far exceeded his ability to go get them, or his desire to hang off a cliff and kill one. So didn't get a sheep, which is kind of sad, but he had adventure of a lifetime. And I was in new country that I hadn't seen before, saw a lot of sheep. So that's a good sign. Sheep are pretty healthy. Went on 2 mountain goat hunts this year because we have, those are also a draw species in Colorado. I had 2 friends that had mountain goat tags. Both of those guys were successful, both with bows. And then, got a really good population of Shiras moose in Colorado until the wolves get a hold of them. And another buddy killed the Shiras moose in September. And then, I've had a lot of other hunts to go on. I've got an elk hunt lined up for a little bit later in the year, and then an antelope hunt this weekend. So I've always got something going on, whether it's mine or somebody else's. So big fun.
That's awesome, John. So you said the sheep resource is pretty good there, healthy right now. I think Jimmy John killed a monster of a bighorn there, didn't he?
We had a really good fall for our auction hunter, Jimmy John, who bought it at Wild Sheep out in Reno. Paid a new record for sheep tag and a new record for Colorado, $600,000, and he killed a 200+ inch monster ram that kind of knew was there. So I mean, he had a pretty specific sheep picked out. I mean, the sheep in Colorado on the surface look like they're doing pretty good. We've got about 7,000 sheep in Colorado, 6,500 bighorns, and about 500 deserts. So the auction hunter killed a good one, and those funds go right back to both the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, which is how I know you, and the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So, busy fall and a pretty good year for overall so far. It's still pretty early here, October. We hunt through November for deer and elk, and then got a lot of late seasons in December for deer and some cow elk to kind of control the population. So
that's awesome. Yeah, very cool. So you guys got deserts in Colorado? I didn't know that. Is that a transplant or?
It's a transplant, and it's in. I think we've got 5 units right now that all have tags. We have 1 non-resident tag, and anybody can apply. I shouldn't probably say this out loud, but you can apply as a non-resident. There's no points, and it's I don't know what the fee is, but it's not a lot. You just pay the tag fee if you draw. So if you're not applying in Colorado, you better get on it.
Yeah,
So,
I just learned something I got to get on today for sure.
there go the draw odds. So you can't.
Yeah.
You can't apply for both at the same time. You can't apply for Rockies and deserts the same year. So even if you're a resident, you got to pick one, and if you're a non-resident, you still have to pick one.
Yeah,
so,
well, that's real hardship. So
yeah,
yeah, awesome, very cool. And then I thought there was a monster resident that killed a big, like a big bighorn this year too. Like there were 2 massive rams taken out of Colorado. Was there another one? I think I seen a little bit on social about that.
Yeah, so we had a unit that had been closed for a number of years that's known to have a very small population of sheep, and it's a lower elevation unit, kind of right along the Front Range, and it does really well for the rams. The ewes and the lambs just don't seem to be really hanging in there. So they opened it up this year. They had 1 public draw tag, and a woman killed one in there, and it's a real interesting situation. It's a very small. It's typically a fishing and duck hunting public land access. And the rules here are, because it's close to metro areas, because it's close to, a lot of population, it's primitive weapon only, which by definition here means shotgun or archery. And she opted to kill it with a shotgun. So she killed about a 190, 192 ram on the second day of her season. And then Jimmy John went in and he found a ram, basically the same general area, and he killed his with a shotgun. And then the third person in the mix was a woman who drew the statewide raffle tag where we sell $25 tickets. And she got in there and killed the third ram that was probably 192 to 194. So all 3 of them were over 190, and all with shotguns, which I'm pretty sure that's never been done before.
Yeah, that's a bloody record, man. That is so cool. Wow. It's like when you say it's close to an urban area, like how close to it, like what are we talking?
Oh, it's probably 20 or 30 miles west of a city called Pueblo, which is in the southeast region of Colorado. So, like I said, it's the foothills, but it's kind of dry desert foothills. There's a lot of irrigated fields. There's a lot of ditch water, and so there's a lot of green grass a lot of the year there. So they're in, they're not like up on people's lawns per se, but they're definitely not high elevation backpack in wilderness hunts. So.
Yeah, right on.
That's the thing about Colorado. There's a lot of people, and animals tend to migrate to the best spots, and a lot of times that's where the people are, because that's why the people live there. It's lower elevation and a warm downsloping wind in the winter. So, yeah,
right on. Yeah, very cool. Well, John, one of the reasons we're talking today is I catch up on all this stuff, and you and I, whenever we run into each other, I think last time I ran into you was in Idaho at their banquet, but maybe it was Sheep Show last year. I can't remember which one. It was. We haven't had a good chinwag for a little bit here. So, and whenever I do, it's like you just running into and the sheep family is like this. You run into an old friend and you just start gabbing, and then all of a sudden 20 minutes goes by and we don't know each other. Like but we get together and it's like we've known each other for 20 years. And so that's the cool thing about our sheep family. And I've always got so much respect for you for what you do in our conservation community. And we can talk about your professional side of things too. But today we're going to talk about a controversial issue. And, in BC, we're really struggling here with the anti-hunting movement, the grizzly bears in 17. And now I know that, in Colorado, you've got that proposition on the ballot that's coming up here next month. Bunch of other stuff. You guys have been really fighting the good fight there in Colorado around a whole bunch of issues. But the one that's coming up most recently, and I've seen the press release, and it came as a surprise to me. And I sit on some of these government committees, and they're pretty good about letting us know what's going on, what's coming down the pipe when stuff happens. And this kind of just out of the blue, I seen the press release, and I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. And then later, later that day, they're like, oh, and by the way, this is what we've done. And we certainly would have raised issues around what went on. But what we're talking about here is the reintroduction of wolves in Colorado. And specifically, they're bringing wolves out of British Columbia. They've sourced these wolves and they're doing the transplant into Colorado. And obviously, when that happened, literally that day, I got some phone calls from my good friends down in Colorado. They're going, "WTF, Kyle? What are you doing here, man?" Like, well, just to be clear, that was not my personal decision. In fact, we didn't even know about it. But anyway, 100% on board with you guys. We want to support Colorado on all these issues. But today, what we're really going to dig down into is this wolf issue. Now, John, I know you got a professional life, you've got a conservation life, and you wear many hats. So I'm going to let you kind of talk about who you're representing today, what you're representing, and set up the call, and then we're going to dig into this issue around Colorado wolves.
Yeah, so sure, Kyle. So my role here today is general concerned citizen. I don't represent any groups. I'm currently not on any of the board of directors of any of these groups. I have a ton of friends, like you said, in the conservation world, in the wildlife world, in the outfitting world, in the ranching community here in Colorado. And so what happened and why I'm kind of calling you is it's a combination of, it's the perfect Venn diagram. All these worlds of mine collided. And so I've got, past president of the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, board of director in 3 different decades, various tenures from 2 to 6 years. So I know a lot of people in the conservation world. And to your point, I sat on a lot of boards and committees with our own Parks and Wildlife Department. Everything from I sat on the interview committee to hire the director several years ago to I was on, the habitat committee where we decide where to spend all these auction and raffle funds to help reintroduce bighorn sheep or do bighorn sheep habitat work so that we can prep for bringing bighorn sheep in. So I would say, on the surface, I've been involved for almost 25 years, and in depth, attend meetings, follow along, generally know what's going on, have applied and been denied to sit on our Parks and Wildlife Commission, which is a 11-member board that makes all these decisions. And we've seen same thing you've seen in BC. And I would say the province of BC and the state of Colorado are nearly identical. We have about 6 million people in the state of Colorado. And I looked, you guys have like 5 million people in BC, but you have like 1.5 or 1.6 million in the metro areas of, Vancouver and Abbotsford and that southeast corner. And they basically dictate what happens in the rest of the province, exactly what happens in Denver Metro. We have 1.7 people jammed into about a 90-mile north-south, 30-mile east-west range right along the Front Range of Colorado. And those voters, predominantly in that area, voted in to reintroduce wolves into Colorado in 2020. And it was, I'll tell you, the listeners, it was a razor-thin margin. We were 50.91% to 49.1%. So we were within a 1% margin of error. And what's interesting, and I can send you the information, if you look at a map of the state of Colorado, it's broken into 13 little smaller counties, or it's broken into 64 little counties. 13 of those voted yes out of 64. And 5 of the ones that voted yes are the ones that could at some point in the future have wolves. The rest of them are completely outside the area. So it was a west of the Continental Divide, which separates Colorado almost down the middle. East slope is kind of the flatlands. West side of Colorado is all mountains. And the Front Range voters voted to put wolves in somebody else's backyard. And so that's what we're dealing with right now. So like I said, I see real similarities between BC and Colorado. And, I hope maybe this talk or podcast will get somebody thinking like, hey, we don't want to do this to our friends in Colorado because it's going to be really bad. So, I can talk about the animals. I can talk about what's happened since the release in December. I've got a lot of information and I've been following it really, really closely. So what do you want to know that will help people understand?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things. First of all, I was thinking about this urban-rural divide, right? And here we are. We have, and like you said, you've been talking to ranchers, you've been talking to people on the land in these rural areas, and they're going to be dealt this shit sandwich with these wolves coming in and killing their cows or killing their kids or whatever. Just they're going to be wolves, and they're going to do what wolves do. And it's interesting, here we have an urban center dictating what's happening in these rural environments. And it's really scary, but that's a rabbit hole. And honestly, We know that exists. So I think today let's keep it high level and work, or actually let's dig into the wolf issue itself. So maybe take us through, John, a little bit of history of wolves in Colorado. So it's a reintroduction. So I'm understanding there's an extirpation, there's been an introduction, now another reintroduction. Talk about sort of the process of what you've seen in terms of wolf populations, sort of historically, and what's happened in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so best information is there were no wolves left in Colorado from about the mid-40s till now. Every once in a while, starting in the 90s, there were reports of wolves. There was a sighting of a wolf. We've had coyote hunters kill a wolf. We've had a wolf hit by a car along I-70 on the way to the ski areas in the mountains. We have documented photographic evidence of wolves coming down from our northern neighbors in Wyoming, kind of wandering into Colorado, maybe setting up camp, leaving. And what's interesting is Wyoming has a wolf exclusion zone. So the extreme northwest corner of Wyoming up against the Idaho-Montana border, wolves are protected. Wolves have a hunting season. They have quotas. Most of the rest of the state is a zero tolerance. If there's a wolf anywhere in the rest of the state, they can shoot it on sight. So wolves get shot when they get out of that zone. They made it to Colorado somehow. And then I want to say in 2021, we had a male and a female have a litter of pups in Colorado. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife tried to capture them to put collars on the male and the female. And this was probably the first inkling of a real big controversy in my mind. The state of Colorado tranquilized wolves, net gunned them, or I think they net gunned them, tranquilized them. But when they landed the helicopter and put the collars on it, the wolves were in the state of Wyoming. So Colorado State Parks and Wildlife was acting in the state of Wyoming without Wyoming approval. And that was one of the first things that I was like, that's a really bold move, because you're now messing with somebody else's wildlife. Wildlife does not pay attention to state boundaries. And the wolves came back into Colorado. They successfully raised, I want to say 4 pups, but shortly after the pups were old enough to leave the den, the female and 3 of the pups were killed in Wyoming, we believe. They just disappeared. A male and another pup from that stayed in Colorado and have persisted in Colorado since 2021. In 2023, we re-released 10 wolves in Colorado out of Oregon. And the Oregon wolves came from a pack that were known depredating problem wolves. And in our wolf plan, it clearly states don't do that. And so when the wolves came here, they dumped them on, this is where it gets really tricky. Part of the 10J rule was, which is an environmental impact free, they don't have to do a full EIS. They can just say they're experimental. We can do what we want with them. They shipped 10 wolves in here and they dropped them on extreme winter range, Colorado land that is owned by the state, because they couldn't do it on federal land because they didn't have approval. So they dropped them on state land that the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Mule Deer Foundation had spent tens of thousands of dollars doing habitat work to make the winter range better. And they dropped wolves in the middle of what was then still a declining deer and elk population. Well, those 10 dispersed over the course of time, and they settled in the valleys, which is where most of the people in Colorado live because our elevation is so extreme. And they settled on the ranch right behind me. That is my friend's ranch. And they were there in December killing cattle from December through, I want to say the last depredation was right in the beginning of September. They've killed somewhere north of 35 sheep and cattle, cows and calves. And we only have 2 wolves in this whole valley. This valley is the home of the first wolf pack in Colorado. They depredated 9 sheep in one day. He lost 13 more. Don't know where they went. Can't find the carcasses. And they were within 30 yards of his house before the final straw was, we're going to trap them. And so in the middle of the summer, and I'm sure a lot of people in BC know trapping wolves is not easy, they managed to trap the male, the female, and 4 pups in about 3 weeks from this ranch. They removed them and placed them in captivity. The male was somehow injured, but not from the trapping. He's since passed. So right now on the ground, as near as I can figure, because they're very shady with details sometimes. We had a wolf killed by a mountain lion. One of the transplant collared wolves was killed by a mountain lion in April. The wolf that was the male of this pack died in captivity under medical care. And then a third wolf died in the beginning of September from injuries sustained from we don't know what yet. But most likely, our theory, because I know the ranchers and the ranchers know what's going on, the two wolves from Walden, the North Park pack, came down and tried to steal the female wolves from the transplant wolves and killed one of the younger males. So that's right now we have, if I'm not mistaken, we have 6 or 7 wolves on the ground in the state of Colorado, and nobody will give us more wolves. So we've tried states like Wyoming, states like Idaho, states like Montana, state of Washington all said no. Oregon gave us wolves and they said, we're not doing that again. We had an agreement with a couple of the Native American tribes here in the U.S. to send wolves, and they reneged on that. They pulled back their approval back in June, and then they started looking again, and then, much to my shock and yours as well, British Columbia said, oh, no problem, we'll give you some wolves. So if I'm to read what's going on, nobody wants to give us wolves because anyone that has wolves realizes this is a bad idea. And I would say I wouldn't want to send my wolves to Colorado because 60% of the wolves that we have here have died or have been put into captivity. So is that really fair for the wolf? So that's kind of a broad overview of where we are. So it's a lot to digest.
Yeah, it is a lot. And really good background and perspective. Okay, let's go back this up. And who's driving this? Is it the commission? Is it sort of pro-wolf entities like conservation organizations that are supporting? Who's driving this initiative to repatriate wolves into the state?
So we have a really interesting system of government here where it doesn't take a lot to get something on a ballot. A ballot is a statewide or a local initiative that the people affected can vote on. And for us, the ballot initiative was really pushed by outside people, not necessarily, maybe there's some Coloradoans, but it was an animal rights group that wanted to repatriate wolves into Colorado. And they collected the proper amount of signatures, but they were very crafty in how they did it because when they put it on the ballot, they said they would not be a game species. And so once they're here, they're not under the control of Parks and Wildlife for hunting. There will be no hunting of these wolves unless we change state law. So they're not like they're dropping in, a herd of bighorn sheep, and in 10 years when there's 200, we can start hunting them. They will never be hunted until such time as we change the law. So they're outside the control. It's the craziest thing ever because we put the ballot initiative took the control of the control out of the hands of the people that should be controlling it. And that's similar to what they're trying to do with our mountain lion initiative, where the prop is going to say no more lion hunting, but they can still kill them if they're harming livestock, or we can pay somebody to go kill them, but there will be no hunting. And so it's really a slippery slope because it takes the proper management out of the hands of the people with the most information. So, and it's really being driven. I mean, our governor is a known animal rights person. His husband is also a known animal rights person, and they've really gotten into this well past what I've ever seen any governor get into. Most governors like, the wildlife's important. We got other things to deal with. You guys that know wildlife, go deal with it. They are handpicking people to be on this wildlife commission that will be favorable to their agenda, is what I see.
Okay. Now, talk me through this. Like, there are these ballot box initiatives, and we've talked about some of the issues. It's been well documented on several podcasts about how we're taking these issues out of the hands of wildlife managers, and we're letting the general public, who maybe are not educated on these issues, decide. So that's what happened with the wolf reintroduction. Can we not just put one back that says, wolves are banned, or we should kill all wolves, or whatever we wanted to say? Like, can we not do that on the other side?
We can. Those are very expensive propositions. And I don't know what the numbers are. It's in the millions of dollars that they spent, one, to collect the signatures, two, to promote it once it's on the ballot to get the votes that they want. But I would say they are somewhat disingenuous in the way they put it on the ballot, because it sounds like, oh, we want to rebalance the ecosystem with wolves. But they leave off all the bad stuff. And what they didn't do was they didn't prepare anybody for the wolf reintroduction. We're playing catch up. So, they said, oh, we're going to compensate livestock owners for depredations, but they didn't have a mechanism for it. We're going to compensate livestock owners for depredations, but we don't have anybody trained in doing necropsies on what's a wolf depredation versus a lion depredation versus a bear depredation. We're going to provide money for a range rider or somebody that can go wander these mountains 24/7 to protect these herds, but that's not feasible. One person can't cover tens of thousands of acres here. So it sounded like a good idea, and I think there's probably some voter remorse because we've had nothing. I wouldn't say nothing. I see a lot more negative publicity towards the wolf reintroduction than positive in some cases. So when you do that, I think the tide has changed on that, on the wolf thing, but they've already released them. So the proposal or the ballot initiative said, we'll reintroduce wolves before the end of 2023 to establish a viable population. They didn't put any definition on that. That wasn't 100 wolves. That wasn't 1,000 wolves. There's no number. There's no end. And so I see us we're going to get to a problem point well in advance of where we can fix it before we start dialing it back. And so, I mean, our deer and elk populations are not doing great in Colorado. Our moose populations are marginal at best. I mean, we've got 3,500 moose in the whole state of Colorado. So we're not talking about thousands of moose compared to like someplace like British Columbia. And I mean, the outfitter business is the same way. My friend, he had a viable outfitter business. He took, 15 to 20 muzzleloader and archery hunters in September. He canceled all of his September hunts this year. One, because the ranch behind me, which is optimal sheep and elk and deer habitat, had no deer and elk on it all summer. We didn't see a single deer and elk on that piece of property behind me. Normally there's a couple hundred in there and they're grazing on the meadows. They're living their lives. Well, they've moved off and they have not come back. And so he canceled all of his September hunts. He's got hunters coming in this weekend, and we'll see. That's the first start of our rifle season. And we'll see if he even finds an elk for these guys. So it's going to be detrimental. And all we've asked for is a pause. Can we not bring 15 more wolves in from British Columbia this year? Can we wait until we have all of these non-lethal measures on the ground and activated before you drop more wolves in here? So that's kind of where we're at right now. We're looking for a pause. We're not canceling the project, but let's make sure we're doing it right. And that's kind of where we're at. Nobody's done the full impact study of what's happened in the last 9 months. And now they're just like, we got to get more. It seems like there's such a rush to do it that it's ill-advised.
Let's just touch a little bit on, and we'll dig more into this, but before we do that, talk a little bit. Do you know why those deer and elk populations are diminished? Is it other predators on the landscape? Like the habitat looks good. To me, I look at that, I'm like, that's a good chunk of land for wildlife.
Yeah.
Or is it, probably not the 7 wolves, I would imagine, but
no, it's not. It's not the 7 wolves. It's been a compounding thing. So we've seen a couple different things. We've had a couple of back-to-back bad winters, and that is the one thing in Colorado. That is our rate-limiting step for anything on the landscape. Viable winter range. You probably heard about our Vail Bighorn initiative, where we had 120 bighorns that were concentrating on one hillside in one little mountain town outside the Vail ski area, and that is the only winter range that is left in their entire thousands, millions of acres. And that's where they all go in the winter. And if you take that winter range away from that herd of bighorn sheep, those bighorn sheep will no longer be on the landscape. So winter range is very concentrated in Colorado, and it generally coincides with ranches because it's usually river bottoms and low elevation. Colorado on average is like almost 7,000 feet in elevation. And a lot of those high elevations, it goes from 14,000 down to 7,000. And the deer and elk can live in that in the summer and the fall. But when wintertime comes, it shrinks. The available winter range shrinks dramatically. So we had a couple of bad winters, which knocked out a calf crop. We've had, I won't say unregulated. I'd say I would call it poorly regulated tag allotment. So our deer tags are 100% allotted. You have to apply and draw a tag, but they kept the numbers pretty high, even though the deer population seemed to be dropping. And the same thing, the elk cow tags are regulated, but male tags are over the counter. You can just go buy a tag and you can go along that hill behind me and all the way up on the top and try to find one on the public land. But those numbers they didn't start cutting those numbers until the drop was so dramatic that it's going to take a while to recover. So bad winter plus probably a little bit of over harvest, and then poor calf recruitment and fawn recruitment. And we do have quite a few bears and mountain lions in these areas as well. Those are they're kept in check, I would say. We see more bears and more lions than we used to. But they're single animal killers, not packs. So that's kind of the synopsis of how it's going and then why it's kind of declining. So,
okay. Great. I appreciate that. Thanks. That gives me a lot of perspective. Now let's talk a little bit about, you're really connected to this issue. You've been working with, you're connected to the ranchers, friends of yours, the outfitter. What's their take on this? They have to be scared shitless, to be honest, about what's going to happen. They've already had these huge depredation events. Have they gotten any compensation so far from the government from that last event? Or you talked about these issues with not having the proper inspectors and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah,
I just want to get a bit more perspective on that.
Yeah, I think the incident inspection is a tough one because I was up there in, I think it was May, and I was literally on night patrol with my buddy. We got off the clock at midnight. The range rider came back on, and they rode around, and they're firing cracker shells. They've got flashing lights. It's right in the middle of calving season, and we came back at 5 a.m. just as it's getting light, and we saw a wolf out in the middle of the meadow in the midst of all these cows. Now, it wasn't stalking, it wasn't depredating, but just a wolf walking amongst your cows is pretty unnerving for a rancher. So we chased that wolf, fired cracker shells at it. We spent probably an hour and 45 minutes running around trying to get it off the landscape. And we're talking tens of thousands of acres. It's everything you see behind me plus. So it's not a simple little fenced square pasture. And so after chasing, we kind of took stock in what was going on. And I was like, hey, there's some birds over there. And that's usually the first sign something's dead. And so we wandered over there and we found a dead yearling calf, which is probably a 500-pound animal, half submerged, a couple bite marks on its side. It was in a little creek bed. We pulled it out, and you could clearly see rake marks where they basically tried to grab the throat, and they try to strangle it or hamstring it in the back. So the back legs were all chewed up, and this thing had probably fought for an awful long time. It wasn't like a quick bite like a lion. And so by the time we pulled that out, called the local officer, he got there, the local sheriff got there. I stayed with them and did a full 3-hour necropsy, and we were looking. I've got pictures, video, the whole 9 yards. Well, that's the same person that has to make the determination, was it a wolf, was it not? But it's also the same people that pay you. So there's a little bit of conflict there. So that's why the sheriff is there to document so we can say, hey, listen, here's the pictures, here's what happened. And so they haven't filed any. They will get compensated for some, but they don't have a number of what's missing. So they get compensated, and they're waiting till fall shipping. So they'll ship all the calves that were born, and then they'll get a price. And then they'll say, okay, this calf that was born in April would have brought $850. Give me $850. And the problem is everybody says, oh, they're going to get compensated. That's also years of genetics. That's years of their bulls and their cows. You can't just go buy a cow and put it on the landscape and have it be part of the herd. It's all about the genetics. So I'll give you another example. When I was up there in August and we rode we rode out into it's a mountain pasture. It's public land that they graze on for about a month and a half. They put out 169 pregnant female cows. When we gathered 169 adult cows, but we only gathered 140 calves. So they were 29 calves missing. And typically on that, they might lose 3 to 5. Call it 8 on the outside. So they were way over on the missing. But there's no body. You can't prove what killed what. But having run that, these are 3, 4, 5 generation ranchers up there. So they know the landscape. They've been there and know what's happening. And what's interesting is you could say, well, that's one herd of cows. That happened over and over and over. Best guess, this one rancher who runs quite a few cattle, he's missing probably north of 100 animals in 6 months. That's a lot of depredation. So has he been compensated? No. Will he? He will for some, but probably the unknowns we'll never know. We'll never know what happens to him.
Well, and then the other point you raised earlier, John, is all the resources going into freaking a range rider. They're talking about being on patrol. Like, you start adding that up, and it's like, what's that guy's time worth? What the hours spent? The range rider? What are these guys getting paid? And the time taken out of his productive time where he could be out, whatever, doing something else on the ranch that's going to make him money. So there's all these resources, which of course there's no compensation for that. They're not getting a penny for that stuff. So there's all the money on the front end that's being lost as well in terms of trying to manage this. And then, dealing with a freaking sheriff and a necropsy and, how many hours did that take? Right. So, and if we're talking hundreds of animals, it's substantive and it's expensive. So,
yeah, it's expensive. And I think one of the other things that's probably important to point out, they've made the announcement that they want to put these wolves from BC right back in on top of what's going on now because they want to bolster the wolf population. So they want to take the wolves from BC and continue to try to grow this population, even though they've had 3 dead, 1 in captivity and 4 pups in captivity. Now they're only down to a few. They want to add more. Instead of dealing with the problem, they want to make it worse. And I don't, one of the things they claimed, and I tried to figure this out as well, looking on some of the BC stuff, these are not coming from depredating packs in BC. Well, they might not be depredating livestock, but I know everybody up there has concern about the caribou herd, and they're removing wolves at a rapid pace to protect the caribou herd. So why would BC want to drop that problem back on us? That's part of it why I called somebody in BC. I'm like, what is the thinking here?
Yeah, obviously not thinking, for sure. So now just let's talk a little bit about, and then I want to talk about BC because I want to kind of save the sort of the most important for last here. But let's talk about, that there's the depredation events, there's, compensating for ranchers and stuff but what about the freaking ungulate populations? You just talked about it, moose and elk and deer, the numbers are down, a couple of rough winters. Now we're going to throw on some wolves that are starving to death. They're hungry. And it's so there's that whole issue around ungulate populations. Is that something that, and you talked about, for example, the governor who's got this, real agenda relating to wildlife but do these people, do they never ever think about the wildlife that it's affecting? Like, I get it. It's a apex predator, it's a mega what do they call it, a charismatic megafauna, whatever you want to call it. So grizzly bears and wolves, they're beautiful and they're great for fundraising when you're an anti-hunter, but what the hell are they thinking when it comes to these other populations? Colorado's renowned for giant rams, they're renowned for all these other things, elk hunting, all these other, and and I guess maybe that's the thing, is they're renowned for things that are relating to hunting. And that doesn't align with the agendas of some of these individuals.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. 15 wolves from British Columbia are not going to wipe out our deer and elk population. I think we have like 400,000 deer and about 300,000 elk in the state of Colorado. Add 7,000 sheep, 3,500 moose. We have 10,000 bears and probably 4,500 lions. So those animals right there, the lions are eating an elk a week. That's a pretty sizable amount of animals getting eaten on the landscape. The problem is with the non-hunter thinking that, oh, it'll balance itself out. There's going to be no balance here. The hand of man is really controlling what happens in Colorado. We are really good at managing our ungulate populations. We're pretty good at managing our predator populations. We had a ballot initiative that prevented us from using dogs to hunt bears and bait to hunt bears. So the only bears you can hunt now, there's no spring bear hunting. You can only hunt in the fall. And currently, since I think that was a 91 or 92 ballot initiative that prevented bear hunting in the spring and baiting. We kill more bears now than we did when we had spring bear hunting. So it's not like they're not going to get killed. It's just a different way to control them. And so I don't think the ungulate population is going to get wiped out. What I think is it's unfair to the wolves to be dumped in this situation where the landscape is no longer wolf friendly, or it's not conducive to having a lot of wolves here. If the wolves had come across the border from Wyoming and established themselves, it wouldn't have probably been as bad as dumping them in and continuing to dump them in. What my buddies have always said is, listen, if a wolf came through here, pack of wolves came through here, ate a cow or two, ate 6 cows, and then went to the next place, not a problem. We lose cows all the time. But when we can't lethally remove them if they're in our herd. We have to call somebody to get the report in. They're going to be a day behind. Scavengers are going to come. We're never going to know what it is. So without control and without that management piece to the puzzle, the wolves are going to be habituated to people. They're going to be running amok. We haven't really gotten to where there's a good place that they can live without interference from people. Colorado is, I think, about a third the size of BC, and we have the same amount of people, and they're pretty well spread out. It's not like the North where you have vast, untouched wilderness like you do in BC. We're more like probably the southern part of BC in most of the state. So it's pretty well traveled. We've got highways, we've got recreationists, we've got ski resorts. And that's the other thing. Colorado, any given day, there's about 1 million tourists here. So we say we have 6 million people, but any given day, there's about 7 million here in the state.
That's huge. Okay, so let's get to now the source for these wolves. So we've got 7 resident wolves that you're familiar with in the state. You guys have gone out and tried to not you guys, the state has gone out, the commission has gone out and tried to source wolves from a whole bunch of jurisdictions, which has failed for the reasons you stated earlier. And then all of a sudden, BC's got their hand up. And just to be clear, Wild Sheep Society BC, our stakeholder groups, NGOs, we were not involved in this decision making. The decision was made at the government level. We had no input on it. So our government's quite happy to ship these wolves down to Colorado. And of course, they're not depredating wolves, because really the wolves in northern BC, there's not a lot of livestock there. So of course they're not going to be depredating. Just go grab any wolf in northern BC, it won't be depredating on livestock because there is none there. So that's pretty easy. So let's talk a little bit about what the state's done and that is the issue that we're like BC's so readily happy to give you guys these wolves to repopulate the state.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very telling that no other Western state would give us a wolf. I think it's very telling that one of the native tribes had given us permission, and they took that permission back and said, we think this is too much of a hot button issue. It could affect our tribes in Colorado or other native tribes in Colorado. And I think that's one of the plays where it's like, if those peoples on the ground are relying on deer and elk and moose and sheep as part of their staple, this could impact their livelihood and this could impact their way of life. Could we sustain some wolves here in Colorado? I think so, but definitely not just continuously dumping them in as an experiment. I mean, that's basically what this is. It's taking something from its native habitat. Now, I'm guessing a wolf in British Columbia is pretty darn tough. And if you dropped it in a valley with beef cows and sheep, it is not going to have a problem surviving there.
Yeah.
It's probably going to get in trouble. If you or I were, didn't have to get a license and we could shoot a beef cow or we could shoot an old deer, I'm guessing we'd probably shoot a beef cow and eat pretty well. So I think just because they're not depredating doesn't mean they won't learn that behavior in about 30 seconds. They're beef cattle are much slower than elk. They're probably a lot easier to catch and probably taste just as good to a wolf.
Yeah, well, and I'm curious about the transaction here in BC about, if our managers have thought this through in the sense that, like you said, it's an experiment, to do the reintroduction, and then there's a problem. And now, where did these wolves come from? And BC is the source for it, and, I know Jan Demoski reached out when this happened, and, she was getting phone calls from people because Jan is connected like you are to the community, conservation community, saying like, what the hell are you guys thinking? And Jan reached out to me and I'm like, just shrugging the shoulders, right? It's like, obviously we didn't endorse this or, and you're absolutely right. These wolves in northern British Columbia they're incredible killers. And, talk to any outfitter on the landscape and talk to people that are in the know in the north. There's two things that are a big thing. And the biggest one for sure is predation. Like the wolves are running amok, and that's the main source, right? Grizzly bears are bad. There's some mountain lions and stuff, but really the main issue, to the point where we're shooting them out of helicopters in British Columbia. Like the government's paying people to do this, right? Like clearly there's an issue. And, what does it look like in 50 years down the road? Is this Colorado going to be flying around in helicopters with sharpshooters and removing wolves? And we just don't know, right? Obviously our government doesn't know. And I don't know if anyone's thought this out too clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately, when I knew they were going to start trapping, I called one of my outfitter friends up there who used to be a stone sheep guide. And he said, trapping them in the summer is really tough. But when I gave him the demographics, like the county area where these wolves were released is basically the equivalent to one of a guide and outfitter's units up there. And some of those guide and outfitters, they might have 40 or 50 wolves on the landscape. And he told me about 8,000 large ungulates, stone sheep, deer, elk, moose, caribou. And he said if he didn't kill 10 or more wolves every year out of 30 or 40, he saw a drop in ungulate population. So once these things get established, I don't know how we control them, because even if it was, let's just call it 20 wolves and 2 packs of 10, they would clear that entire county out in a matter of months, and all the wildlife would go out, and then the wolves would move, and then the wildlife come back. I get it. That's part of the natural play. That's the part of the natural way things work. But the problem is we don't have those big, giant landscapes. All of those ungulates that are wild are going to end up in towns and on some farmers' fields, and then the farmer's going to have a crop depredation permit. And he's going to say, well, they ate all my hay because they weren't in the mountains during the summer, so now I have no hay to feed my cattle. So now I got to pay feed prices. And it's amazing how disruptive this is. And it's not disruptive at all to the people that voted for it. That's the hardest part of this for me. And that's what makes this Prop 127 with the mountain lions. None of the people that vote for this are going to ever see a mountain lion. They think they're going to be running amok, and that's just not the case. So yeah, it's an interesting dilemma for sure. And I'd say it's going to become more prevalent as long as the rural-urban divide continues, if we don't educate people on both good and bad things that are going to happen here. So, Colorado, everybody wants to go out and see the pretty leaves and go hear bugling elk. Well, in 10 years, if we have 1,000 wolf on the ground, that is not going to be the case. It'll be desolate wasteland, and you won't even hear a wolf howl because nothing's on the landscape. So I think it's going to mess things up pretty badly.
Well, and here's the thing, I'm always a bit cognitive and a bit reluctant to, you use the terminology desolate ground or desolate bare ground or whatever terminology you use there. And, and I use stuff like that too. And I'm like, And then you get kind of pushed back all your fear mongering. I'm like, well, no. Look at British Columbia. Look at what's happening with caribou. We've got species at risk. We've had the federal government step in because we had a wolf problem. That's a fact. It's clearly drawn out. It's been challenged in court, so that it's undeniable, right? So anyone that thinks that that can't happen in Colorado, you're freaking kidding yourself. It's happened in BC. It's clearly documented to the point where caribou are on the verge of extirpation in certain areas, even in northern British Columbia, because of wolves. It's clearly documented. There's zero doubt about that. So anyone that says, "Oh, that's not going to happen in Colorado," it's whatever, you're fear mongering. I call BS. I'm not fear mongering. It's a fact. It's happened here. Why wouldn't it happen there? And yeah, it's not going to happen with 7 wolves, but keep dumping them in and see what happens. To that point, John, I think you said 11 wolves is what they're proposing to bring down. Timelines, 15. Do you know anything? 15. What are the timelines?
They want to do January this year. So we've got a little bit of time. Everybody said they dumped them maybe a little bit early because they put them in mid-December, but that's just when they could catch them in Oregon. But it's interesting because when they caught them in Oregon, I looked at all the footage I could. I looked at all the press release tape. I looked at all the video footage. They caught them on dry ground, maybe damp, wet, but not snow. Where they dumped them, I mean, this is the middle of Colorado in the winter, 10,000 feet at the base. It's basically the bottom end of winter range, 8 to 10,000 feet. And so they dumped them. I don't know how prepared they were for that, but they just dumped them. And we even talked about, is there any better way to do this? Is there any acclimation? And I just don't think either way they do it is a bad way to do it. But the parameters are it has to be on state or private land. You can't dump them on public U.S. Forest Service land or BLM. And so it really limits where they can do it. They've identified 2 big, basically blue blobs. One's a northern release zone, which is where this was. They won't release them within 60 miles of any native land, and they won't release them within 60 miles of any border of any other state, especially Colorado, Wyoming, because they know they'll get shot there. And so it really limits the geographic region where they can drop them. And so dropping them again in the same spot just seems like, it's lunacy. You're beating your head against the wall and expecting a different result. And that's just not how it works. I mean, this is a, large rural area, but it's still in the center of Colorado. It's not like it's completely remote wilderness. So Rocky Mountain National Park is one of our biggest national parks in the entire state. It's the biggest national park in the state, and it's got a phenomenal elk herd. But it's a phenomenal elk herd until about December. And then those elk leave that national park, and they are on private and Forest Service lands on the edge of communities. And they're now pushing out into the flats because there's almost too many elk up there because they can't control the population. But there's only been 1 wolf over there. And Rocky Mountain National Park, they can't even release them there. So it's one of those, like, where do you release them if nobody wants them? And the only people that are willing to give it to us is BC for some reason. I feel like there's probably a good enough reason to take a pause here and give it a year. Give us some time to settle out what's going to happen and put these other non-lethal measures in place, from range riders to, they wanted to put up these fox lights and these flagery, these electrified fences. And I mean, they have no clue. I mean, people were like, they should have to fence their whole property. Well, they have a 9-mile border behind that picture right there of national forest. And it goes up and down, and it's beetle kill and deadfall and cuts in the, it'd take you 2 years to run electrified fence across that back boundary. So yeah, it's just not feasible. And that's part of the frustration, I think, is they keep moving the goalposts on the ranchers, and they keep the hunters in the dark. They won't tell us what's going on. They knew they weren't getting wolves from Oregon in June. They didn't tell us that until August. And then they waited till September and said, hey, we've got a new source. It's British Columbia. So there's a lot of backroom dealings that goes on. I would say I've never seen a more secretive plan for wildlife. Usually they're pretty forthright with what's happening. And even to the point where, my friends on the ranch have asked for the radio collar data. Can you tell us when the wolves are coming close to our ranch so we can be on alert and go out there. Can you tell us, they're across this back ridge here and it looks like they've set up camp. They're going to be there for a while. They're denning. They will not tell them anything until after the fact. And then all they'll say is, I can confirm there was a wolf in that pasture between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. And, oh, yeah, it might have killed something. And then they go look for a dead animal. So we don't have any of the collar data. And that is all blocked and private. They won't give us any of the information. And it doesn't matter if we request a Freedom of Information Act, which is supposed to let us have that. That is protected information. And they're concerned that, you're going to use the data to kill the wolves. And my friends up there are like, listen, if I wanted these wolves dead, they would be dead and they would be 20 feet underground and you wouldn't know the difference. They've really, really tried to work with the government on this to keep everybody happy. And it's at the breaking point for sure. The access to their property for any wildlife projects, it's dead. The fishing access that they had provided on some of their streams probably going to go away after the lease is up. So it's going to hurt for a long time, and it's just driven a wedge between, the bureaucrats and the government and the ranchers and the public and even the hunters. The hunters are like, listen, we pay for this wildlife. We don't spend any tax dollars on wildlife management in the state of Colorado. All the tax dollars or all the management dollars come from hunters. And none of the hunters wanted this. I mean, I shouldn't say none. I'm sure there's some, but not a majority. So it gets voted on by people that have no clue. It gets voted on by people that it doesn't impact them at all. It sounds like a good idea. And it gets forced on the landowners, the ranchers, and the hunters.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple points I want to clear up. So Colorado, it did the original supplied wolves, but then this year they said, Oregon, and Oregon wouldn't supply them this year. They said no to it.
They said no. Yeah, no more wolves from Oregon.
Okay.
And then at least three different tribes Native American tribes have been asked. 2 said yes, and then 2 have now reneged on that. So they've said no, we're not going to do that. And then the states of Washington, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, which have wolves, said no. So why not go to British Columbia? That makes sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then so let's talk a little bit of what you'd like to see if we were to do a call to action for our listeners, what you'd like to see from there. So let's talk a little bit about, you talked about a pause, like do a bit more of an assessment, have a better idea, get a better system in place to address these depredation events, to have a plan, at least some sort of plan, some sort of finite number of reintroduction. So what can we do here in BC to support you, John, in sort of this initiative?
I'm sure it sounds like I'm preaching to the choir, and I'm sure everybody that listens goes, why are we doing that? That's a terrible idea. I'm hoping somebody that hears this, you and I working together, maybe get your BC press involved, just let people know what is happening from a wildlife perspective in BC. I feel like you guys are entitled to that. Like, did the BC citizens know, hey, we're giving these wolves to Colorado? And so if you can get the word out, if you can talk to somebody, if you know somebody who said, I've got plenty of wolves, they're just coming to my ranch to trap them. Well, now you probably know why they're trapping them and not killing them. Raise the question, where are they going? Why are you sending them to Colorado? Did everybody agree to this? It sure doesn't sound like it. And so really raise awareness and help us, if you can, put a pause on this and give us some time to build in all the backside that we need. And the other piece is, and this is one of the things they really hammered on my rancher buddy, is they said they have a dead pit. So every ranch has a dead pit. They throw dead carcasses, whatever it is, and it basically degrades over time, skeletonizes, and scavengers come in there. They said you have to cover that dead pit. Well, the dead pit in the middle of April was out in the middle of a muddy field. They didn't get in there for almost a week, maybe a little longer. And they're like, well, you baited the wolves in with dead cattle. Well, that's a normal practice. Like, that's what happens. We didn't know we had to bury it. So they want to set up, and this is how ridiculous this is. They want to set up basically like a trash service where a truck will drive around and pick up all the dead carcasses so that no rancher has a dead pit. Well, if you do that for anywhere in a geographic area where there could be wolves, you know what kind of money we're talking about to pick up carcasses? I believe to date we've spent about $5.6 million getting 10 wolves on the ground. And if you think about that money, yeah, $500,000 a canine. It gets really expensive. And I don't know that the taxpayers know that, because one of the original things said, oh, it'll be an ongoing program that might cost $500,000 a year. Well, maybe once it's up and established, but that includes depredations, that includes range riders, that includes cracker shells, equipment. I think the voters of Colorado were sold a bill of goods that far exceeds their expectations on expense. I'm sure they grossly underestimated the expense. So if we can get word out in BC and somebody can help us, hey, listen, I think this is a bad idea. I know you've got an election. I think it's next week, if I'm not mistaken. If you get somebody up there that knows something about wildlife, and maybe just put a bug in their ear and say, hey, listen, do you know this is happening? When does the new regime take office if they were to change?
Immediately,
okay.
It happens quite quickly. Like, not immediate, but it's like the swearing in happens quite. Yeah, we're recessed right now, and then they go back, I think, in I'm not exactly sure the timelines, but it's pretty quickly. So it's not like it's a year down the road or something.
Okay, and I mean, maybe either way that election goes, somebody that knows somebody could put some pressure on them and say, listen, can we reevaluate this? This seems like a really bad idea. And my guess is whoever's making the decision there doesn't have half of the information I just told you. Did you know, mm-hmm. Put a bug in somebody's ear. Somebody knows whatever your minister of wildlife is. Somebody knows that person. Hey, are you aware of this? Oh, no, they just asked. We said, yes. Why? Oh, well, did you know this is a problem? Did you know the vote was 50.9% to 49.1%, and the people that voted for it aren't being impacted? I mean, it's so similar to what I could see happening in Vancouver, where Vancouver votes for something, but it only impacts people in Fort St. John. Like that's the equivalent of what has happened here. So yeah, if there's any way to get the word out, like I said, anybody we can talk to, anybody that'll talk to me, my ranching buddies, the outfitters that we know. I mean, we're scratching and clawing to get this thing, slowed down, delayed, not necessarily stopped, but stopped for this year, stopped for the next introduction. So that's kind of where we're at.
Awesome, John. Okay, well, love it. I'm going to send this straight over to our board of directors for a quick listen and get them up to speed on the issue. And I can say personally, when I seen that email come out, I did see the press release about Colorado getting BC wolves. I was like, oh, lovely. Yeah, great. So there we are. We're the source for this mess, right? And, we've seen the mess in BC that this has created, right? Again, it's nice to see wolves in the landscape. We just don't want, our ungulate populations completely decimated, and certainly our, the cost of the economy and like, the amount of money that's being spent now on the cull in northern BC, it's literally tens of millions of dollars, right? It's well documented. So, we appreciate it, John, and certainly we're thinking about you guys, and I'm hoping that we can do more to support you, and at least at the very least create some awareness around this, so that either have a healthy pause on it so you guys can do a bit more work on it, or at the very least that next time, because there's going to be a next time, you say, yeah, we need 100 wolves now, and BC's not jumping at the bit, putting their hand up, say, oh yeah, come to BC and get them. And I think the one takeaway for me and maybe for our listeners is that why the heck is BC stepping up? No one else will do it. You can't get wolves anywhere else. So it kind of points to who's the bad guy here, right? Certainly from a conservationist perspective, you care about ungulates, and you're looking after wild sheep and elk, and then of course the impact on the ranchers and the economy in Colorado. Who's the bad guy? We're the ones supplying it. It's like we're the drug dealer giving out the drugs, right? It's not good.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate the time. Thanks to you. Thanks to all your listeners. I'm glad I reached out. I'm glad we had a chance to chat and catch up, and I'm sure I'll see you at a sheep show or a sheep banquet somewhere in the near future. But I do appreciate the time, and thanks to all your listeners. And like I said, if anybody has any ideas, we're all ears. Talk to your friends, and this may knock it out before your people get to vote, but good luck, and make sure everybody freaking votes. That's our problem in Colorado. Yeah. If all hunters got out and actually voted, we would actually win more elections. So everybody needs to vote. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, and making wildlife a priority, right? Like start making these things a priority instead of Yeah, it's so frustrating. We've been talking lots about that here in BC with everything that's going on. So yeah, really, really good points there, John. I know you got Prop 127, so the mountain lion issue, and we've talked a little bit on the podcast on this. I'm hoping we can get maybe Charles or Dan on the podcast here and talk about 127. Do that here in the next little bit, because I know the election's not too far away now. We're getting inside of just outside of a month before you guys go to the ballot on that too. So.
Yeah, and I think the key with that Prop 127 is it's defining trophy hunting. And I'll be honest with you, the next thing to go in Colorado is going to be trophy hunting of bighorn sheep, trophy hunting of mountain goats, trophy hunting of moose. They're going to not stop at mountain lions, and they were very disingenuous in the way they went about getting mountain lions, lynx, and bobcat in the language, even though we don't hunt lynx here. So it's a slippery slope for sure. And once they get their foot in the door, they're going to not stop. So hopefully we'll see how that goes in about a month. So.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, thanks again, John. Look forward to seeing you it's only a few months away till Reno, and appreciate all you're doing, and really appreciate you raising awareness on this issue. And we'll be in touch. I'm hoping that we can do a bit more to sort of take this issue to the next level, and at least people are aware of what's happening. Can we make an effect change? Not sure, but at least people need to be aware of what's happening, because when I'm getting phone calls from people in Colorado going, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this to us?" It's there's an issue, right? So
exactly.
Thank you.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.